So, thank you all for sticking around. We're going to be on a shorter, a little tighter timeline, so we'll move quickly, and I want to make sure we have enough time for everyone to ask some questions. My name is Dan Green. I work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on the media and information-related grant making, and also have 20 years background in journalism. And part of my interest in this is that we've been working with a lot of other foundations that fund media and journalism on trying to help media organizations better use metrics and measurement and web analytics for their work, and yet at the same time not be completely controlled by them. So I'm very excited to have with us this panel. We have François, forgive me for your name, Bourboulon, who's the digital editor at lesechos, Matthieu, Llorens, the CEO at AT Internet at the end, and then Dennis in the middle, Dennis Mortensen, who's the founder and CEO of Visual Revenue. Each of you are going to have a short time to chat about your work, what you've learned so far, and we'll ask a few questions and then we'll open it up to the audience. I think it probably makes sense at the beginning. I might start with François, as from inside your newsroom. If you could talk a little bit about your experience with analytics and the data that you use inside your newsroom.
Yes. So my name is François Bourboulon. I'm digital editor for lesechos, which is France's main business media organization. We have, of course, a print newspaper, print daily, and we have a website, and we have digital apps and iPad, tablets, and smartphones. As far as analytics are concerned, I would say that I've been working for the last 3 years for lesechos, and when I got there, analytics were mostly absent from the newsroom. There were only a few data given to the news staff about what were the most read stories issued from the print edition. What were the most read stories on the website, but that was about it. We have tried to change that in the last 3 years. We have introduced analytics and data almost everywhere and at every moment of the day. We use them as, of course, as tool for site management, but we also use them as a tool for the staff management. You know, we try to evangelize our new staff, which is mostly from basically print staff. We try to evangelize and help them appropriate the website, and analytics are a very good tool to do that. So we have a whole battery of analytics that we disclose all along the week, you know, in every morning by mail, and in the news conference every day, and we have a bigger occasion every week where we disclose a lot of different analytics about what's going on the site, what stories are doing well, what stories people are most interested. So we try to give a lot of insight of the site to news staff, which wasn't that much interested in the beginning, and now he's getting much more passionate about audiences and what's and most read stories. So basically, that's the point.
Great. I think I'm going to skip, Dennis, I'm going to come to you last, because I know that you actually use AT Internet in your newsroom. So I want to skip to Matthieu to talk a little bit about the kind of work that you're doing, kind of the practices, best practices in terms of the work that you've been doing with news organizations. And you have your presentation, yeah. Great.
Hello, so can you hear me? Yeah. So I'm a bit lazy, it's a bit late, so I'm going to do that in French. Donc j'ai une présentation.
Just a quick presentation. I'm at AT Internet. We're involved in mobile and social analytics. We've done this for about 15 years now. We work basically with all the French news organizations and a lot of European news websites. I'll just do a quick run through here to talk to you about
Voilà, donc on travaille.
So as I said, we're active in most countries worldwide, added around 4 billion pages in the media sites. And what I think is important, the slide show isn't right, but what I would like to say to you is that currently there are basically 3 types of main data. Data that's related to traffic acquisition. So how do you use your data, first of all, to bring people to your property, then the data that can be used to actually target your audience, and there's another type of data that you'll use to analyze overall quality of what you're offering and what's done on the site, so overall quality. But the issue today, the problem today, is that generally this is done in the wrong direction. And I apologize again for the slideshow, but the best thing isn't to just look at acquisition data, that's the most frequent mistake, but rather, first and foremost, you have to look at your site's quality and performance. Then, after that, you can think about targeting, and then subsequently at a third stage, you should actually look at traffic acquisition. The most important thing, and we've heard this several times today already, is content, quality of content on offer. To try to spend money and analyze how to bring more people on board, more people to your site, if it's not up to snuff, if it's not the right quality, that's really a money pit, and it's not really the right way to organize the way you manage the data you have available to you. So, specifically, if you're talking about visitor loyalty, what does that boil down to? What does this mean? There's a great deal of information out there, and it's very important to try to improve the quality of the media and the quality of content. We're talking about ergonomics here, usability issues, also response time that's often too long. I've listed some of these here. Sometimes 10 seconds on a mobile phone. If you take 10 seconds, you lose 50% of your audience. I'm showing you probably not necessarily the future. I'm showing you a snapshot of current problems. You could talk about some of the biggest media sites on their mobile apps. There's still a lot of things that aren't working well. A lot of data is currently available to improve on what's not working well. Probably the main issue has to do with ad servers. Ad service tools used to broadcast advertising. I won't give you the overall figures today. They're not necessarily significant in terms of your experience, but I would say to you a lot of ads aren't delivered, are not getting there, and that's a serious problem. So rather than try to generate 30% more traffic, it'd be a good thing to successfully serve the ads to your current traffic. So you need to first of all use your data and see if the people are really quickly and easily accessing the content on your site from anywhere. Now, another point. There's another thing to look at, and I think this is a dangerous equation. The idea whereby you'd say, if I have more pages viewed, I'll have more ads seen and therefore generate more money. I think that's just a very short-term approach, and usually this leads to really ergonomic mistakes. The best-known one is to cut up content into several different pages. So as you can say, I've got 10 pages, that means 10 times more ad space, and that is a catastrophe in the long term, that type of approach, because it's not the type of user experience people are looking for on the internet. It can provide for short-term gains, but not long-term success. Another big set of data available has to do with targeting. We hear a lot about targeting, editorial targeting, and what we see is that can be a truly powerful strength, but at the same time, there's a sort of dark side to this that you have to be careful about. And there are ethics issues here, and in the long term, there are also practical considerations. So specifically, targeting. There's a very relevant type of targeting that can be done in terms of actual location of users, geolocation, observing their behavior on the sites, technical equipment devices. Dennis will talk about some of this later. Visual revenue does these things very, very well. Doing this, you can improve the user experience, and in the long term, generate more traffic and have more clicks. The ads that you set up on your site can become more relevant by using this data, and you'll have happier users and advertisers. So practical very useful things to be done with the data here. The other way around, there's the dark side to targeting, as I term it, when you're trying to adapt your editorial policy according to the most frequently consulted content, the expected content by users. This is possible to do this. You can gauge this, measure this type of thing. You can also measure the content that's most indexed in Google and generate more traffic. But there's a big risk in doing this. It's a pretty simple type of risk. I mean, it's true. It can work, and if you can. It's difficult, but it's very difficult to organize. It's also very costly. But in the short term, if you do this, you can ratchet up your traffic. But in the long term, let's talk about the consequences. In the long term, you lose your credibility. You see more uniformization of devices, and all the sites start basically doing the same type of thing. And then very clearly, you end up becoming fully dependent on Google and Facebook, and then you'll never really be completely relevant. And I think you end up just seeing one single page of results that generates 90% of traffic, and not everybody can be on that same page. So that type of calculation, as I see it, based on our observation, is very dangerous. What makes the big media very strong that you represent is the quality that they have and the exclusive content that they can have on offer. This type of targeting we see here leads to uniformization, which is dangerous. I'm not speaking for my own company by saying this, but you mustn't unduly, overly use these tools and over-target. Another point, a parallel that you've drawn earlier, you have to have good web analysts, just you have to have good web journalists. And the journalists have to have reliable sources that respect privacy of people on the internet and so forth. So you have to have robust tools and secure tools so that you know the data you're gathering is correct. Otherwise, the wrong decisions will be made on that basis. You have to be careful with what you're doing with cookies. You also have to have tools that you can use for segmentation so you can filter, analyze, cross-check facts and data. A journalist can't just take one piece of raw data. You can't just take raw data. Averages, of course, don't mean anything either. So you've got to really look into the information, look at its actual meaning. And you can't just let the tool do this alone. You've got to have two professionals to do the analytics. Furthermore, just like a good journalist, a good analyst has to be able to react quickly. So real-time reaction is very important in our line of business. You could have tools that really can process data in real time every 5 minutes to give you the information that you need. Also, you can't just leave it there, just use the raw data, just use the breaking news as it comes, but rather, just like a journalist has a responsibility to actually connect the dots, put things into perspective, to tell the actual story. By the same token, good analysts, web analysts, have to be able to connect up the information and give it some meaning, tease out the meaning from the information. So in the end, of course, we're a software editor, but we can't just trust the machine itself, the software all by itself. You've got to get back to the basics. Joseph Pulitzer, you've got to get back to the basics and what really creates meaning. For this, you need web analysts themselves, people. So the message to convey, don't just use tools and raw data. You've got to have people behind all of this that are independent, that are able to process the information and draw some relevant conclusions from it so to actually be able to act, react, and better improve what's being done in the newsroom. Thank you. I hope I haven't spoken at too great length.
No, Matthieu, that was great, and thanks for doing that quickly. I appreciate it. Dennis?
I'll try to be even more rapid then. So I am absolutely fascinated with the whole concept of the data-driven newsroom. And for some reason, I think we've almost reached the point where it's acceptable even to voice that, the data-driven newsroom. And I do think for some reason that if we go a decade back, it would be very much acceptable to go in and have a chat with Best Buy or any other retailer and ask them, how do you actually manage your inventory? And they'll talk about exactly how they stock. They'll talk exactly about how they figure out what to buy. They'll talk exactly about where they're going to put them on which shelves and which stores and so on and so forth. For some reason, it's been allowed, and to some degree is still allowed, to produce content at will, and it's been allowed to promote content at will for some news publications. And I think that is perhaps okay. I think it's okay if it's done on purpose and the opportunity cost is measured. I don't think it's necessarily okay if I am producing content at will without knowing what the either positive or negative effect is. So what I'm talking about here is, if you look at, and I don't think anyone in here necessarily would be huge fans of them, but look at companies like Associated Content, Seed, Demand Media, who produce content for the tail end of the market. So how to assemble a table, there's a kind of constant demand for that. So they try to predict what content is in demand so they can write against that. That's a whole lot more difficult in the current event space. But I do think that is possible to some extent to predict what I should produce. So if I've written 41 stories about what BP did last year, how do I know whether I should continue on to that 42nd story? Is that a gut feel, or do I need at least some input so I can take a qualified decision? If I decide to write that 42nd story, is that a 40-word update, or is that a 1,500-word long piece that conclude on the events of what BP did? I think that you can predict based on the demand whether you should write one or the other. Once I've figured out that I want to write the story about BP, it's going to be 1,500 words long. How do I produce it in the most cost-effective way? How do I actually decide that this is the story I'm going to go with images from Getty Images, or this is the one where we're going to use our own photographers? Is that either gut feel or just a spur-of-the-moment decision? And once I've kind of reached that point of no return, meaning I've produced the content, and all I can really do now is to make sure that I make the most of it. We're in this kind of, as a data scientist, I think really fun situation, but kind of scary situation, which is that it ages extremely rapidly. So if you're in retail, you can stock an item for weeks, months, years even. But in current events, you might only have 4 hours, 8 hours. The scores of what's going to happen in Europe at the championship, some of those stories are going to be valuable for 45 minutes. That is it. And at that moment, I need to figure out exactly where do I go promote this story. Is that on the home page, or the section front page, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Pinterest? Does it go into the newsletter tomorrow? Those decisions, I think, is exactly what I define as being data-driven. And I think we need some support for that. Not control, not somebody who dictate, not automation, but some support that at least just allude to the fact that this story is not in demand. This story your audience do not like, but you might want to push it anyway. At least you can monitor the effects and say, so far and no longer. And this story about what happened in Syria 7 days ago, for some reason, they want more of that. I think that's fantastic input. So that's my definition, and we spent all our time in trying to develop science around that so we can predict exactly what that next step should look like.
Thank you very much. I want to jump very quickly, François, to just ask, because you've all laid out a really interesting perspective that I want to get a chance to bounce off. The first thing I wanted to just ask, in terms of, François, your newsroom, how has the analytics that you've used, and you and I were talking before, and I'm just wondering if you just take a minute to describe the culture inside your newsroom now that you're an analytics-driven newsroom. If you could just describe, A, how that culture has changed. What do you see on a daily basis in terms of, you were talking about the screens and Chartbeat, et cetera, but how has that influenced your editorial decision-making inside your news organization, or has it?
I wouldn't say that he has totally changed our editorial strategy, but he had impact from time to time on this strategy. As a specialized media, we mostly know what our audience is interested in. Okay, we are on business and finances, so we mostly know. We mostly know what topics, what kind of section they're mostly interested. But we use analytics, just first to confirm our choice, our strategy, to see if what we have decided was a real issue, was a big issue, and that we have put ahead, especially on the homepage of the site. We use analytics to confirm that we made a good choice. So we can change our choices from time to time, because analytics proves that we were wrong. But I would say that most of the time we have the confirmation that this is the real issue of the moment, and that we have to focus on that, and we have to develop our content on that. So this is the basic spectrum. It has changed a bit the way we use the kind of journalistic formats we use. We know that based on what analytics tell us, we know that one story will be better with a very short piece, or with an interview, or with a slideshow. So the analytics can show us what's the best way to explore one issue, one topic. We use that a lot. And the other thing, more surprising, is that analytics have helped us. Sometimes, I wouldn't say that it's every day, every time, but it has helped us also change our editor's strategy on the print, in the newspaper. You know, sometimes in the afternoon when we have our news conference, a newsroom news meeting about what we're going to put on the front page of the newspaper, I used to have a look at what was going on the website, and now all the editors are having a look at what's hot on the site, and that what kind of stories people are interested in, and that would change our choices for the front page of the newspaper. Sometimes we would move a story up ahead, give it more visibility, because we've seen that on the website. Of course, the audience on the website is different from our readership, but since we're specialized, okay, they have kind of the same reaction. So that could move one choice to another, give more visibility to one story, one topic, because we see that that's something that people are interested on the website, on the digital support, and we're going to adapt the print support with that.
Dennis, you wanted to jump in here.
So we actually have some, and I'm sure you'll find that super exciting. So CNN Money and Forbes and Kauppalehti in Finland and other kind of financial destinations are customer of ours. And I can't tell you anything about their data, but in aggregate, what happens, at least from the data that we have access to, is that before we hand over our kind of predictive platform that suggests which stories to put in the hero spot and so on and so forth, before we actually hand that over, what we see is a 5% overlap. That means the recommendations that we make before they're made visible to the editors, in the weeks before that, we've seen a kind of constant 5% overlap, where what we've calculated on a number of variables ends up being that kind of small Venn diagram overlap with the editors. But that's not to say that the other 95% is, and I think you said wrong. We don't see that as being wrong. We're seeing that as being a editorial choice. But that is the natural overlap between man and machine, and I hate to kind of say that in here, but that is the natural overlap that we've seen. That's certainly something where, once we walk in the door, we can see that increase, but we don't really see it increase to more than 15, 20 at the max between that man-machine overlap. What we do see, though, and I think this is absolutely interesting, is that we've seen a change in behavior on some of the editors that we work with, and we have 600-700 something editors on the platform today, that they're more willing to make subtle changes that they didn't see being worth the effort making. So moving something from that list you have on the right-hand side of the hero spot with 10 kind of bullets in it, from 3 to 7. If it's in the list, it's in the list. That's my attitude. But there's typically 300-400% difference in the value of those positions. So it's actually a big editorial decision to move something from number 3 to number 7. And it seems so subtle, like I got other more important stuff to do. But that is actually a really important decision. And we've seen them being kind of willing to do that once they've been empowered with data. Okay, I'll do that. That seems fairly innocent. But it wasn't, and it isn't. But you should kind of go ahead and do that.
So, Matthew, I want to get you in here for a second, because you had a slide up there that I'd like to relate to what François just said, which was the notion about the dark side and adapting your editorial to the analytics. Because to some extent, I think François will admit that changing whatever is in your print edition, because based on what seems to be driving traffic in your digital edition, is clearly adapting your editorial to what the analytics are showing you people are drawing towards. And I just want to get a sense of, where do you think is the important guardrails from your experience with media about, you clearly are gathering these analytics to do something with them. Adapting editorial seems like where most people are going to go, even despite themselves, with their best interest.
No, I think you can adapt your editorial if you adapt the way you present your content. I think that's the way also Dennis sees the things. You know, you have that content, that unique content that your journalists are writing, but the way you present it, yes, you can adapt that. You can say, okay, maybe I'm going to show that to that kind of person, that kind of people. Maybe I will more put some focus there or there, but you don't change really what you are writing, or not too much. I think that I was saying that you need to be careful not to go too far there. Otherwise, I was really interested by what someone from India said just before, you know, about India not talking about the real issue of India, but only about what people wanted to hear. And it's an ethical problem, but not only. I think it's an ethical problem, but it will be also a practical problem at the end, you know, because everybody will say the same thing at the end, because everybody will have the same kind of input. So yes, of course, adapting the way you present your content, the way you build your homepage, the way you build perhaps even your newspaper. Yes, you can adapt that. You can geolocalize. You can help people find exactly what they want. But you need to be what you are and what people expect from your kind of newspaper. They need expertise. They need unique story that they won't find on other papers.
Yeah, I can confirm that it's mostly a question of visibility and position of a story or a topic of an issue. Of course, we are producing the content that we want to produce. We are focusing on the stories that we think are important. We make editorial choices, but then, especially on the web, the presentation, the visibility you give to each one thing or another is very important. That's where analytics are. So analytics will never tell us that we should write about this thing, but they will help us defining the position of a story in a homepage, for example, defining if a story has to be up or lower. So we use analytics that way.
So let me just, I've got to ask you a question, because Dennis, I want you to follow up on this, but I also want you to address this issue, because I do think, let me just take a slightly more cynical view on this. As somebody who is experienced inside of a newsroom, that I would say, give me an example. 15 years ago, when I was at Nightline, we spent a week doing a series in the Congo. I can promise you today, if somebody proposed a weekend series in the Congo on Nightline, they would say, you're crazy. There's no way we're going to spend a week in the series. Do you know what would happen to our numbers? Do you know what happened to our numbers, not only in the program, but digitally and otherwise? That it would be really hard in a constrained environment, with the resources are really tight, for the editorial decisions. And for somebody at the Gates Foundation who cares about global health and development, placement will always be an issue. We can never compete with Paris Hilton, the Royals, financial news, breaking news. How do you avoid it becoming, to some extent, journalists, editors making decisions that drive numbers, that content, that volume becomes a real driver?
I hear you, but I think, like any other organization, the first thing you do is that you set an objective, and an objective which you can measure, and that objective might actually just be that you want to educate people, or you want to make sure that they're wiser on the other side of what you've presented them. And let's say that's your objective. then I think you can actually drive towards that. I actually think there's stories that can help you drive more views on that series if that's what you want to. But you just promoting, to put it bluntly, the hell out of that set of stories might actually not achieve that objective. But I think this is where data might be painted slightly incorrectly, that it's as if the data dictated that we cannot do that anymore. I think that's management and the organization and the publisher as a whole. If your goal is revenue, then you shouldn't do it. You know, if that is the strategic objective of that organization, don't do it. If it's a different one, surely let's make sure that data can help you achieve that. But you can't say management want increased revenue or profit or whatever other kind of capitalist goal that we can find. If that's what they want, isn't it my job to go ahead and do that? That's actually what they pay me to do. If they have a different one, I think data can be even more powerful in making sure that we educate well or whatever that might be.
So, Matthieu, would you follow up on that for a second? Because one of the things you pointed out is that most people seem to get it wrong. They're talking traffic first rather than last in your 3. Can you follow up a little bit on that? Because what I'm quite interested in as well is the notion of, are there good analytics and good numbers and misleading analytics or bad numbers?
I think, no, there are not good or bad numbers. There are good or bad indicators at one point of a project. And what I think are very often people are too focused on getting people on their website. You know, they spend a lot of money on campaigns, on trying to be high on Google and everything. So let's get a lot of people on the website. And after that, they say, okay, is my website a good website? And it's too late, you know. And the people that were disappointed once, they will not come back, or it will be more difficult to make them come back. So first of all, the most important is the content. Is the content and what they find. What we see is that we have around 50, 60, even 70% when you take the people that just type the name of your brand on Google that came back on your website, that are loyal people, that knows your brand. So most of your traffic at the end is people that knows your content and people who come back to your website. So it's always a little bit artificial to try to disrupt people and make them come to your website. The best example that we have of great success on the internet, they never put a dime in advertising. It's that they had the best content, and so people came to their website. So first of all, you have to be sure that you have the best content. And after that, if you are sure that you have the best content, perhaps that you can look at where people come from and how can I make more people come to my website. But let's not mix, you know, the steps and the priorities. And yeah, that's what we observe. So.
I couldn't agree more. I do think there's metrics that can be gamed, though, and any metric that can be gamed will be gamed. So you can easily game page views, you can somewhat game visits if you want to, and I think, for me at least, if I were to pick any one metric that I would use if I were to run CNN Tomorrow or Le Monde, it would be daily, unique article views. I think that's, for me at least, a fantastic metric because it's very difficult to game that one. I can split the article, doesn't increase the number. I can, you know, assemble it, that doesn't change the number. It can be consumed on mobile, that doesn't change the number. So I think if, and I'm not saying that's the better one, but I'm certainly in love with it, that if I can find that one metric that my staff or that the market in general can't game, then I'm onto something that is real, and I have a KPI I can really work to optimize on.
So I want François, you to talk about one thing in your newsroom that I thought was interesting in the culture of when you decided at some point in the morning, in your morning meetings, if you would describe that, where you actually talk about yesterday's analytics, and also your work, you decided to use Chartbeat and how that's kind of the live tracking and how that affected the culture inside your newsroom. And then I want to open it up to questions.
Yes, what we do is that every morning we would send a mail report, as I mentioned, to all the staff, all the editorial staff, with most read stories the day before, the traffic the day before, and the number of visits, and the top five most read stories the day before. And then we also send them the top 5 most read stories in the morning, you know, from midnight to 8, to see what people are really interested, to see if we missed something in what we're planning to do it during the day. So that we do, and then at the news meeting, also offer an insight on everything that's going on the website. What are the most searched word or topics? What are of course the most read, the most shared on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, the most commented story. Well, I do that very briefly. You know, I don't spend 20 minutes every morning saying that, but I think that's a lot of small things that can make, as I said, make a print newsroom interested in what's going on live. And then in the last month we introduced Chartbeat in the newsroom, almost everywhere on screens, and as I have seen, you know, in the beginning, people were entering the news meeting room, just having a look at Chartbeat, you know, say, have a quick look, and then they would focus on the stories. And then now I can see that a few months after that, well, today, people spend the whole news meeting looking at the website and looking at Chartbeat. You know, they're very interested in that, and that's the gaming aspect of the thing is very interesting. Of course. Branding and personal exposition and visibility is important for journalists, and they're getting very interested and conscious of that and on a daily basis now. They're very interested. Also, one other analytics we're using, which is different. It's not about traffic on the website or anything, is that we also publish. We send every month. We send a table with all the number of followers on Twitter for each journalist, you know, and also they're very interested in that. To see who's popular on Twitter, who's gained the most followers, and everything. So
you've got an internal competition going on inside your newsroom.
Yeah. There's no incentive, but we got a competition. But maybe we'll get an incentive one day.
I can actually I can concur. So, and I suggest everybody do this here. So one of our customers, Forbes, the first thing they did when they had Visual Revenue deployed was they went out and bought 7 additional monitors for the front page editors. What is that? You know, $149 times 7, and put that on every single desk, so that they could, I would say, have data injected throughout the day without being forced to kind of go away from their CMS or go away from any other system. And I think that is so cost effective, and it is so easy to kind of push data in a non-intrusive way simply just by buying an extra screen. And you would see that in any other, you know, walk into Deutsche Bank, you'll see them have, you know, 4 Bloomberg terminals on that desk. And I think it should be the same in this environment. So we see this all the time.
Matthieu, I just wondered if you wanted to follow up on that. And one thing, and if anybody's got questions, please raise your hand. I just wanted you to also reference when you were talking about your web analytics recommendation. And do you have not that I want to put you out of have less business with media organizations, but a recommendation when you've worked with media organizations of, wow, there should always be a web analytics person that's independent. How many web analytics people? You talked to me about an organization that's got 25 out of 100. I mean, can you give us a sense of do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely important that there is someone that is dedicated, at least one. But we see that, I cannot say the name, but a large company in Germany, we have trained 400 people about analytics that are trained about that and that access the data every morning. So, and we have some media company where you can find 2, 4, 5, 10 people using analytics. So I'm not saying that every media company should have 10 people doing that all the time, but I think that at least one person, it's important, and I think also that it's important that you have someone that have enough power to be independent. Otherwise, when you talk about analytics, there is IT problems, marketing, editorial, whatever, and sometimes you bring bad news, and you need to have the power and the independence to tell the bad news without pressure. As a journalist, you know, that should be independent to tell the bad news and to tell what you have to tell. So I think that's important. So and on the other hand, we have a lot of customers also who see our data every minute refreshed on Newsroom. So it's important to spread the information. So we have another customer who every journalist have access to the data. They can have access all the time. They can go to our digital workspace where the data are refreshed every minute, and they can check whenever they want what they need.
So make sure your reporters and everybody in the newsroom can actually see what the analytics are that you're tracking.
Two things, that everybody has the data, but there is someone in charge, independent, doing only that and drilling down the data and connecting the dots.
Yeah, spreading the information is absolutely essential. It's absolutely.
I obviously agree because I'm a data junkie by any definition. I just think it could be potentially slightly dangerous in believing that a login to Google Analytics will make people wiser by standard or other really much nicer applications, but I'm not necessarily sure that is true. So say that we have a real-time analytics system in place. I pick a story, I put it into my hero spot, I close my eyes for a while, I look at my analytics application, and that is now the most viewed story. Because I picked the right one, or did I really just create a self-fulfilling prophecy? And I think some editors and some people in the newsroom are not necessarily in a situation where they should try to re-educate themselves into being analysts. I actually think they should just be really good editors and not analysts. So I'm certainly fond of data being spread like a virus throughout the organization, but I'm also just a little bit careful about what information I'm providing access to, and making sure that they actually have the ability to analyze that, so I don't end up kind of patting myself on the back saying, I'm data-driven, where all I've done might actually just have made things slightly worse.
Yeah, perhaps I totally agree. You need to, for me, you need to spread information, not make people do the analysis, and because they won't know. It's complicated to be a real web analyst, to really drill down the data and connecting the dots. No, that's why you need someone who is doing only that. So on one hand, you can motivate people, make them realize what's happening, give them data about their work, but you have to give them specific data about what they are doing, and that's important. And on the other hand, you have people that do the proper analytics, and that's a real job. So I totally agree. You don't have to spread everything, otherwise people will just drown into data.
Okay, I'd like to open up to questions. Microphone here in the front.
Thank you. It seemed to me all you talk about is, the two schools of thought, whether you are a market follower or you are a market creator. And most of us are, in between. But I was just wondering whether you have done some analysis on, some product need what we call acquired taste before it took off. And in restaurant, it's very easy. If you don't make it in 6 months, you better close down your restaurant and, find another one. But in content, in news, do you have some sort of, if it doesn't make it in 3 days or 1 day or so many hours, then kill it. And the second one is, what about the long tail effect? Because in my organization, sometimes we feel it strange that some old stories, they get accessed by people for whatever reason we don't know. Thank you.
So I can tell you what we do in regards to the recommendations that we provide to editors. We are typically instructed, because if we're not instructed, we will use all the content available to us. But we're typically instructed that we are not allowed to use content older than 24 hours or 48 hours, or if I'm a breaking news destination, not older than 3 hours for the hero spot in these positions here. So we actually typically limit it because of the editorial tone that they're trying to depict. So that's less on us and more on the strategy that they deploy. We are super eager to go deep. What we do see, though, just as you've seen, is sometimes you'll win some lottery somewhere and a story get picked up and you wrote it exactly 8 months ago. And I think it's extremely important, just as you indicate, that you have a system in place to actually know that that happens. Not after the fact, not in next week's report where, that's a fun incident. No, you need to kind of be on that on the spot. So if you get picked up by the Drudge Report on something, you're going to get your 1 million visits over the next 4 hours. You should take advantage of that. But it's actually very difficult, I think, to take advantage of that in that moment, because what you need to make sure, of course, is that that audience, which you don't know. So you knowing your audience is one thing. You just don't know the Drudge Report audience. So you're trying to cater to an audience that you have no idea of who is, and that's, I think, that's an exciting moment. That 4 hours where you're trying to take advantage of that.
I think that's a really, really interesting question. In fact, I had put that in my presentation, but I wanted to make it short. So the long tail analysis is something that is really, really interesting, I think, because everybody is focusing, on breaking news and the more fresh news that you can imagine. But one of the greatest things with the internet is that you can put endless, archive and content, and it can make a lot of visitors at the end of the year. And it's true that it's really interesting to study that, and you can, because we have the data. So you can study all kind of content, all your pages, but you have to put of course, you have to study perhaps 3 months of data or 6 months of data, but you have it, so it's not a problem. You can also study keywords referrals, even the small ones, because sometimes you have very good insight there. You can also study if you have a search engine on your website, what people are typing and are sometimes they don't find. And it's true that it's something that it's really specific of the internet, of the digital world, and it's key to study that. And I think that you can find great insight with the data that you already have with web analytics. And it's not that complicated to do, but it's true that you need, yes, web analysts that are able to go and find those gold nuggets within the data, but they are here, definitely.
The average article lifespan on our current events or traditional news customers that we have is between 8 and 56 hours. That means between 8 and 56 hours, the content which you produced ends up in the archive, and then we can discuss how you want to maximize the value of that archive. But that is the window which you have. What we also found is, on average, or in aggregate here, is that about 6% of all the article views on any given day comes from active stories. That means those stories that are in play right now on the homepage or the section homepage. I think that's a massive amount. That also means, if you just directly translate this into revenue, that the majority of your revenue comes off of stories that are in play right now, this instant. And what takes me 24 hours to make is going to take me a year in the archive to make. So I do understand why some people potentially focus less, but it's a gold mine if you want to work it. I actually think you should work it then. So that means you're going to promote your stories in one way over that first 36 hours. And then you are potentially even going to go, not rewrite, but change title and change the content so it better fits into an archive. And we've seen some of our customers do exactly that, that they actually change format as it wanders into the archive.
Other questions? So I have one that was something that was mentioned earlier today that does have me thinking a little bit about this. Two things I wanted to address. One is, earlier in the presentation earlier today, there was a discussion about serendipity. He referenced the more you end up in the good old-fashioned newspapers, you kind of knew the general organization of the newspaper, but you can't necessarily predict what you're going to read when you turn the page. And you actually give people a chance to learn about something they otherwise may not chase themselves in a digital environment. The more you know in analytics, don't you create a situation that serendipity becomes harder? Don't you find yourself in a situation where people essentially are getting content that kind of confirms their viewpoints, even helps kind of solidify where people are in their own silos? I'm curious, Dennis, if you or anyone would like to comment on that.
Just a quick comment. If you haven't read the book, you should take a note now. So Eli Paris's book called The Filter Bubble. It's a easy read and a fantastic story about what he believes happens if you over-personalize. He's a researcher, so it's a proper read. And I think that what we're talking about here is not necessarily analytics or data. I think there's a difference between how you use data. And if you want to utilize data for personalization, I think, and I actually believe, that you can end up doing exactly that. That we were slightly to the left when we started out a year ago, and now we are far out on the left a year and a half later, because somehow we drove our visitors into a bubble of left-wing stories. I believe in that, and we haven't attacked the personalization angle simply because we believe that when we help the Globe and Mail promote a story, that's the agenda, that's what's on their agenda, and they decided that, surely with the help of our recommendation system, but they made that call. I'm not sure they want 40,000 slightly different front pages, essentially meaning that the concept of the homepage disappears. There is no homepage. There's a My Yahoo for the Globe and Mail. That's what they would have then. I'm not fond of it. It might be a good business opportunity. It doesn't feel right to me. He concludes, and if you read the book and the studies that they did it on the Newsroom in Facebook, but it's as valid as on your properties. And it was actually a left-right-wing study they did, that they simply just turned slightly more to the left as they moved on.
Okay. Matthew, did you want to follow up? Or
yeah, I just can't agree more. That's a great book, and I've found that in the New York Times by serendipity, and I think that's that's why, and that's a big problem with Facebook or Google also, because if they start to personalize the results that you get on Google, they will lock people down their own bubble, and I think that the responsibility, the moral responsibility, the democratic responsibility of newspaper is to open people's minds. So that's a real issue, and that's why there is a risk. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions before we let everyone wrap up? Well, this has been extremely helpful. Thank you all and our panelists for this discussion, and we're looking forward to better analytics in the future. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.